today and next Monday. And we'll go over what will be on that, so that way you'll be prepared. But it will be closed note and closed neighbor and like closed everything but your own brain, right? So you'll take that. And then we're gonna talk about thinking like a writer and like the framework for viewing text this year. Online this week, you're gonna take that rhetorical triangle exam. You're going to read, and this is the one thing that I did forget on here, so if you want to write it down, you can. You're just gonna read through a story called Shooting an Elephant, which is here online. So everything here is under the week 1 module, so if you're like, okay, I need to read Shooting an Elephant, you just click on module, then you can come here to Shooting an Elephant text. And you can print it out if you want, you don't need to. You can have it all online too. I made it a Google Doc so that when you need to annotate, you could just like highlight it in color and put comments. But for the first read through, you just need to read through it carefully, and then we're going to talk about it in class and just come prepared, knowing what was in it. So yeah, this time you're just going to read it, and then you're going to choose a nonfiction book for your term 1 nonfiction choice book assignment. That's a lot of words. All you need to do for this is you're going to tell me that you read the whole book, and you will get full points. So I'm not going to make you do a project with it. You just need to read it. And the reason it's so important that you read is because when you go to the AP exam, if you haven't read enough, it will just like go over your head. Like you really need to be reading, and a lot of complex text too. So like if you had me for freshman year, you could pretty much read whatever you wanted for your choice book thing. But for this one, and I'm not sure if I'll do another one, but if I do, it'll be complex text, because those are going to help you when you get to the AP exam. Because I think what students struggle with the most is just they don't have the vocabulary to deal with some of these texts that they put on there. A lot of them are like early 1900s or pre-1900s, and so you're dealing with a lot of complex words. So the more reading we can get, the better. And I'll show you a list of some good ideas and where you can find that on Canvas. And then you just need to have that completed by October 21st, so you have like a ton of time. And you can totally do it early too. And then you're going to fill out the disclosure document agreement survey. So put a PDF of the disclosure and then a link that just says, like, yes, I read it, my parents read it, here's any questions we have. So let's look really quick at the nonfiction book stuff. If you come here, there's the term 1 nonfiction book assignment and then the survey. So the assignment has a bunch of different options for books. You'll just choose a book. You may need to like get it at the library. You don't need to, I think most of these are available at like the public library, so you don't divide them unless you want to. And then, yeah, have it read by the 21st. So some books that are good. Complications, a surgeon's note on an imperfect science by Atul Gawande. So this is like an interesting look into the medical field, which I know some of you might be in like Mrs. Abbott's like nursing or I can't remember, like med tech classes, which are pretty fun, so maybe that interests you. I'm actually reading this one right now, Nothing to Envy, about North Korea, which is like so sad, but like it's like a train wreck, like you have to keep reading. It's just interesting. Unbroken, they made a movie of this, right? But the movie is not very good because Angelina Jolie directed it. That's probably not why, it just isn't very good. Very good book, though. I really liked it, about a prisoner of war and just his journey back home, basically. This one is really interesting. It's going to sound weird, but it's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It's about this lady. She had cancer. She goes to Johns Hopkins. I can never say that. Johns Hopkins. Anyway, that hospital. And they take a biopsy. And back in the day, you didn't really need permission to like keep any like cells or anything like that. So they kept her cells, and her cancer gave her cells like this genetic anomaly where it would just keep reproducing. And so they actually use her cells to do a lot of different trials, medical trials on, and her family never got any money for it, but her cells are still used today to like cancers with it. They've done like Alzheimer's research, just a ton of stuff on these cells. So kind of like a weird sounding book, but very good. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. He wrote this story about this murder that kind of happened out in the middle of nowhere. And Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, she helped him to write it. So you'll see some of like the To Kill a Mockingbird style in this book. Into the Wild, this guy basically sells everything and goes and lives in like the wilderness. So I think there's a movie of that one too. The Devil in the White City is about the first like serial killer in America, and also the World's Fair. So they kind of pair those. Erik Larson has a lot of nonfiction books that are pretty good. The Glass Castle is a memoir about a lady whose parents basically have chosen to be homeless, and she gets dragged around with them when she's younger. But then as an adult, like, she kind of is looking back on this experience, and it's kind of sad, so that one's sad. Malcolm Gladwell writes a bunch of books. The Tipping Point is one you may have heard, like Outliers or David and Goliath. There's like a ton of nonfiction that he writes. Educated is about a girl in like rural Idaho, and her parents are part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they're kind of weird. They're almost like fundamentalist Mormons, and the dad is like very controlling, and it's really good. But she doesn't even have like a birth certificate because they're like super anti-government and paranoid. So that one is interesting. I haven't read this one, but Behind the Beautiful Forevers, Life, Death, and Hope in a Mumbai Slum. So I've heard that's good. Steve Jobs or Leonardo da Vinci, just biographies by Walter Isaacson. The Sports Gene, Inside the Science of Extraordinary Athletic Performance. So why athletes are so good and the genetics behind that. Thinking Fast and Slow. I haven't read that one either. I've read like a lot of the first half, but the second half I haven't. Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind. So just going over humans, their history. The Boys in the Boat. Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. So introvert stuff. Destiny of the Republic. Born to Run. Lab Girl, Between the World and Me, and Killers of the Flower Moon. If you want a book that isn't on here, that's fine too. You just need to put it on a survey so I can make sure that it's at like a good reading level. But you can pick stuff that's not on here. So you'll just pick one, and then once you've picked it, you'll just upload on this. It'll take you to a link. Sometimes it looks like it's broken, but if you just click up here, it will take you to the link, and you'll just tell me what book you read. Is it on the list? Or have you okayed it with me? So you just need to okay it with me before you, if you don't want something on that list. And then do you have it in your possession, or will you? I just want to make sure that you've got it so that you're not procrastinating until like the last week, and then you can't get the book, because that would be bad. Any questions on the nonfiction text? Yeah, so if it's not on the list, you can just, if it's on the list, then it's okay, right? But if it's not, then you just email and be like, would this work? And I'll say yes or no. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's like, oh, and then the disclosure document. So, I'm not really going to go over it in class, but you just need to read through it. So the PDF is right here, or whatever it is. I guess it's a docx, but it goes over kind of what we'll be doing, a little bit about the AP exam, grading, and talking about like additional help. So like we don't have class in the afternoons or on Fridays, so you can come during those times and get extra help if you needed it. Okay. All right. Now that all of that boring stuff is done, let's start talking about the rhetorical triangle and then Frederick Douglass. So, you guys remember from your previous years the rhetorical triangle? It's like a term you've heard. Okay, great. That's good. Okay. What is the rhetorical triangle? Any ideas? Yes.
It's like the relationship between the speaker, the audience, and the hearer.
Yeah, good. It's this relationship between how all those things are working together to achieve some purpose. So I have given you today that little paper for your notes. So I want you to write on that today and this will help you with your rhetorical triangle exam. Yeah, so we'll go through this. So rhetoric, then, we call it the rhetorical triangle, right? It comes from the base rhetoric. There is this guy back in the day called Aristotle. And Aristotle and other philosophers would argue with each other. They would be like, okay, how can we be the most persuasive? And they got to the point where they're like, okay, are there like particular like strategies or points that are more effective than others? And so they called this rhetoric, the art of being persuasive, or the ways that they could persuade people. So there's kind of two definitions that for your exam you need to know, okay? The first one is it's any choice that a writer makes. So as a writer, you're making choices. And people are writing not just, in your journal, maybe you're just writing to like get stuff out of your head. But when you're writing to a wider audience, you're writing for a purpose. And so you're making choices to achieve that purpose. And that is what rhetoric is. So understanding the tools of rhetoric allows speakers to appeal to, impress, and persuade their audiences. So done well, it's the art of effective communication. And that's the other definition I want you to write down. So these things in green. So any choice a writer makes, and it's the art of effective communication. There's a lot of communication that is ineffective because you're not thinking about what you're doing. But when you're thinking about what you're doing and how you can persuade other people, that is rhetoric. Okay, so those will be the first question on your quiz. So just have those in your head so that you can write them down when you get to the exam. Okay? So great rhetoricians have the tools to resolve conflict without confrontation, to persuade readers or listeners to support their position, or to move others to take action. So these rhetoricians are able to make in society, they're able to create movements, right? Really good speeches like "It is here" or books because we're feeling moved and we want to act, and that's what good rhetoric is. And so rhetoric is very powerful. The better you are at convincing an audience to do something, the better rhetorician you are. If you think about in your own life how rhetoric can be powerful, let's say you want whatever the new cell phone is, right? And you want your parents to buy that for you. If you're just like, "Hey mom, buy this for me," the odds of her doing that is fairly low. But if you think, okay, who is my audience? My mom is my audience, right? What do I know about my mom? That she loves me. I know that she likes it when I work and I do like chores for the family. What do I know about myself? I know that like I do these things that she would like, or I know that I'm a hard worker. So then you can go to her, you can approach her and say, "Mom, I know that like life is hard right now, and now that I can drive, it's hard to keep tabs on me, right? Like, wouldn't it be nice if there was some technology where you could be like, where is my kid?" And then you would just know, well, there's this phone right now. I know you're thinking, I already have a phone, but this one is better. And then you explain why. And I will do chores to do that. So you're trying to convince her. And the more that you know about your mom and yourself and the product and the way that you can leverage those things, the more likely you are to get that phone. So the rhetorical triangle, and you're going to write the notes. We've got ethos, pathos, logos, right? So ethos was what? What does it have? What does ethos mean? So that's speaker, right? But what about the speaker? Just yell it out. Yeah, it has something to do with like, okay, what is my reputation, right? As an expert. I guess I started with logos on this. Okay, but what is logos? logic, right? And you're looking at the subject and the kinds of evidence used to develop it. So hopefully that evidence is logical, right? And not illogical. So you can use things like facts, just like reasoning, but you're looking at the subject and the kinds of evidence used to develop that subject. Okay, and then what is pathos? Pathos has to do with the audience. So what are you trying to manipulate with the audience? Their emotions, right? Okay. So pathos is the audience and their knowledge, ideas, beliefs, and attitudes. So you're looking, when you go to give a speech or a presentation or something, you want to think about your audience. Be like, okay, what do they care about? How can I use that to my advantage to get them to agree with me? And then like Andrew said, ethos is the character of the writer or the speaker and how it might be used effectively in a text. So you can put those, it doesn't really matter which point, the points are kind of interchangeable, but the point is that there's three. And then the inside, so what the triangle is trying to accomplish, right, those three things, is the purpose. So what is your purpose for speaking? That's what you're trying to use ethos, pathos, and logos to achieve. And it's what the author hopes to accomplish through this text. And then outside of the circle, well, like the triangle and the circle, is the context, or what is sometimes called the exigence. AP likes to use that word a lot. But what that means is the time in which the text was written and the reason why it was created. So what time period is this? Why did this person feel the need to write this? Why does it exist, sort of, okay? So there's your basic rhetorical triangle. That should be review. Hopefully your teachers taught you that before. I feel like I did, but it's been a while since I taught you. So hopefully your sophomore teachers have gone over that with you. Now you'll notice that there are these arrows along the triangle. I guess I didn't put them on yours, but you could draw the little arrows. These arrows show that not only are there these things that you're looking at, but they're interconnected. They work together to achieve that purpose. So, and they go both ways. So with ethos and pathos, the way that those work together is the writer understands something about his or her audience, and then that understanding makes the writer highlight certain elements of his or her personality. So I know something about you, and so because of that, I'm going to try and bring out those aspects of my personality that I think will apply to you. So I'm going to, if I knew about TikTok, which I don't, because I'm a loser, but I may try to be like, okay, so there's this video on TikTok, and try and apply that. Maybe I'll get more fun as the year goes and gets less crazy. Or if you knew something about me, you're like, oh, she's an English teacher, so she must like to read. Maybe you try to leverage that and get on my good side and be like, I read this really cool book. I don't know. That may not work. But you're going to try and think about that relationship and that interplay and highlight certain things about you. Okay, so then looking at the way that, and I want you to write these down too, because these will be, you don't have to write down word for word, but at least the general idea. Those will be on your exam too. So between ethos and logos, the writer creates a persona on what he or she knows or believes about the text or the subject of the text, and then that is what bits of evidence or proof he or she finds most compelling and persuasive. So you're looking at the subject and be like, what part should I put in here? Should I include this? What do I think would be the most compelling based on my own expertise? And then you're going to put those in there versus, okay, I'm not an expert on that subject, so I'm going to maybe ignore that evidence because I can't talk to that as much. members of the audience hold some beliefs, and based on knowledge and past experiences about the reader and about the subject, they tap into these beliefs as they listen or read. So you come with like a background, right? And you're gonna be biased by that background, whether you want to or not. And then members of the audience also use their ability to reason and are persuaded by the strength of the evidence presented about the subject. So based on these biases, you're gonna look at the evidence and either agree or disagree with that. So as the reader, as the speaker or writer, you're gonna wanna be aware of, okay, what biases could this audience hold? And then how should I manipulate the subject matter to then cater to that audience? Which sounds kind of manipulative, but like honestly, rhetoric is manipulation in some ways, where you're trying to accomplish your goal, and you're gonna do that by the most persuasive means necessary. You're not lying, but you're just presenting your argument in the best light so that people will agree with you. Also be on your exam, so you want to make sure that you understand how they're related to each other. Do you have questions on how they're related? Examples of these different appeals. So these are called like appeals. There's a logical appeal, there's pathos, and the appeal to pathos or the appeal to ethos. So you're appealing to these various sides of things. I think freshman year I kind of tried to be like, okay, what person, like what side of the rhetorical triangle are they using the most? But in AP, you want to look more at like the interplay between these. So you can say like these are all going to be used on every text, right? And it's good to know which one is being used most, but also how they work together to achieve that purpose. So, looking at just examples of these, if I were using an ethical appeal to establish my credibility and trust as the author, an example could be a speaker gets up, and especially like this fits really good with COVID, right? I send my children to local schools, and I'm an active member of the community. So maybe they say that like, you should send your kids too, it'll be fine. They won't die of the COVID, right? But basically what this does is it establishes his credibility on local issues and investment in the community, which is the subject of speech, right? So if he's trying to get your kids to go to school, he's saying like, look, I do it too, so don't be freaked out. Like this is my credibility as a speaker, is that like, I live in this community and I know how things go down. Emotionally, an appeal, a speaker might explain, he sees a child on the street in the cold without shoes or jacket. Very sad picture of this poor, forlorn child. And this appeals to the audience's pity and invokes a desire to help that child, because the tiny humans, we care about the tiny humans. We should care about like all humans, but we especially care about the tiny humans that are sad. And then logical appeals, you use facts and reasons to support your argument. So an example might be in Martin Luther King's speech. I believe this is the I Have a Dream speech. He says, in any nonviolent, no, it's not I Have a Dream, it's a different speech. It might be like, I can't remember the exact one. Anyway, he says, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. 1, the collection of facts to determine if injustices are alive. 2, negotiation. 3, self-purification. And 4, direct action. So we've gone through all of these steps at Birmingham. Oh, this is when he's talking about nonviolent protests. Okay, so he's using a logical appeal here, because he presents the facts that underlie the theory of injustice and then applies these theoretical steps to the situation that they're in Birmingham. And then they call for a stop to injustice. So he's using a very logical, here are all the steps, they all apply to what we're doing, so therefore this is a good action and we should do it. And we need justice. Okay, questions? Sort of review, yeah? Okay, great. Now you guys are gonna talk to each other. So you should have read Frederick Douglass over the summer that was sent out to you. If you haven't, you'll just have to listen in on the conversations, and then we'll figure out something to do for your exam. So this was about Frederick Douglass, who was a slave, and then he was freed, right? And so now he's talking as a freed man about the institution of slavery, his own experience, in hopes of shedding light on the evils of slavery and ending it. So, with the people sitting next to you, I want you to take a few minutes and you're going to discuss these three, which they're kind of like 3 plus because there's like multiple questions and stuff like that. Questions, okay? First is, how does Frederick Douglass want his audience to see him? So which side of the rhetorical triangle would that be? You want the audience, how you want the audience to see you? Ethos, right? Okay, so he's presenting himself in a certain way. And then what does his tone, what does tone mean? Any ideas what tone is? Have you heard that word before? Yeah.
Just like the way he's saying it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like if he's angry or if he's, I don't know, there's just different ways of saying things and that kind of defines what you're trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, so it's his attitude towards what he's talking about or towards his audience, right? His tone. So you could say like, oh man, that sucks. And you're like, okay, that's kind of not that harsh of a tone. It's just like a bum tone. But you could be like, that was the worst experience of my life and I hope everyone burns and dies. That's a little bit more acidic, right? You're like, oh, that person's hateful, right? So there's, you can say the same things but in different ways. And often my mom would be like, it's not the words you say, it's how you say them. I was like, oh mom, that was like a lesson in tone. I got all here. Apparently I sassed her. So anyway, so you're gonna look at what does his tone, his voice, and diction tell you about him? So what are the words he says? That's say, I can talk. I teach English, it's fun. How does he say it, and what is his attitude towards his audience, and also what he's saying, his tone, right? Then you're going to talk about how does Douglass appeal to the beliefs and emotions of his audience. Which side of the rhetorical triangle is that? Emotions of the audience. Got those, okay, good. How does he persuade his audience to respond to his message? So how does he feed on the emotions and beliefs of his audience to then persuade them? And then the last question, what evidence does Douglass believe is the most effective in making his claims? How does he make his argument convincing? Which side is that? Come on, you can do it. Logos, okay. I know it's early, but the more you participate, the more you won't hate this class, right? And that's what we're doing. And also to pass the exam and learn stuff. But like, you can enjoy it. Okay, so just talk to someone next to you. Don't like lick them or breathe on them, right? Because we'll all die of the COVID if you do. But talk to them about these 3 questions. Take a few minutes and do that, okay? Go! Speak.
So first off,
Make
what do you
friends.
think about Frederick Douglass?
It was a great book. It was kind of a short read. I was bad at editing, so.
How does he want his audience to see him? I don't know.
Here.
It doesn't seem to me like he doesn't seem to use that person. He doesn't present himself as an exceptional person.
So,
He just
did you
presents himself
guys read
as
anything
an
this
average
year?
guy.
Mm-hmm. Which can also appeal to people. It's
Okay,
populist.
that's good. Did you read
But
anything?
it can also appeal to people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, nice. So you're
His
gonna have
tone,
to-
he seemed.
For you guys, and especially for
Answer
your
your
triangle,
time.
you're gonna need to think of a book that you read.
You know, just
And then
average
apply
Joe.
the rhetorical triangle to that book. So Harry Potter might be a little bit more difficult than how to influence.
Obviously,
or how
Bill
to
Keck
influence
got anything to say, Brett?
Not
Does he
really.
book?
Oh, tough. You
So think
missed
about
out.
things. Okay, the
Not
second
that
one
high,
is
just
If you can't,
Yeah, me
then
too,
it's
actually. I actually woke up at 4.
best option.
Actually, no, there were 3.
Like these working in it.
It's weird because I woke up at 2.
Andrew, if I'm gonna be honest, I'm not done with the book yet, so.
Establish his credibility. What does he do to?
I'll get there, I'll start.
Or to give the emotions of the audience.
I'm not gonna
Does he
start.
care about
He
it?
seems to try to appeal to the emotions of the audience a lot, but he doesn't seem to do it over the
Oh,
top.
okay,
It
the best
doesn't
option,
seem
there's
to
like a
try to
PDF.
give it
They should
very
email it
much.
to, or I could just.
He just seems to present it how
I don't know
it
that.
is. He doesn't
Okay, did you
add
have
a lot of
this?
extra description.
Okay, I'll just put it up on
Alright.
Canvas.
Very short.
Did anyone else not read it? It's like, okay, so I'm gonna put up the PDF on Canvas today. It's only 100 pages, so you can buzz through it and read it. At least read enough so that you have something to say about it on your exam. So we'll ask you how these appeals are working, and you will, you'll then need to explain that from the text. Okay, so at least, I think if you write at least like half of it, you would have something to say, right? Okay, well, let's just talk as a whole class then, because it seems like there's a lot more who hadn't read it than I had anticipated. So, how does Frederick Douglass want his audience to see him? What are some things that he wants to highlight about himself? Yeah, Andrew.
Just an average guy.
Okay, he's just an average guy, and specifically like an average slave, right?
He said multiple times that his experiences as a slave were not exceptional. They were common.
Good, and why would that be persuasive to audiences? Well, let's talk about first, who is his audience in this book? Who is he writing to? Is he writing to slaves?
No, he's writing to the general population.
Yeah. Yeah, say that louder.
It's writing to the white people who have an influence on how things are like in the future.
Yeah, so he's writing to a white audience who cares about slaves, right? Like who can, and then can make changes, right? Maybe they don't care 100% yet, but he's like, okay, maybe they will care. And if they do care, then they can make changes. How do we know he's not writing to his slave friends? Most can't read, that's like a pretty good indicator first off. And they already believe that slavery is evil, right? They experience it every day. And so he's not writing to his fellows, right? He's writing to a white audience who he hopes can change and end slavery. So then, why would he want to make his experiences seem average? Yeah.
To show that this is like normally what goes on in these terrible acts, just an everyday thing, instead of like, oh, this terrible thing happened, but it's like, just on something and
Yeah, good.
He was trying to show that these terrible events were not an isolated incident, but were the general results of slavery.
Yeah, right. If he said like I had it worse than everyone else, then maybe people would look at slavery and think, oh, well, like he's just an outlier, right? Like in the course of the narrative, he says that like most slaves would at least give you enough to eat. Like I felt like he was very honest about his experience, but then he said some slaves did, or some slave owners didn't. They would, but that was considered cruel even among slave owners, right? So like kind of like a code of thieves, even among these people who suck and own slaves. You at least wanted to give him enough to eat, otherwise you would. I think it was probably more a pride thing, like, oh, I don't have enough money to feed my slaves, right? But he was very honest about his different slave owners. Some he said were really like good overseers, right? And other ones seemed to really enjoy beating these slaves. And so by presenting himself as just kind of an average product of slavery, he is able to convince people of how bad it is, because if that's the average, this is a day in the life, then what are other people experiencing that is so much worse? What do you think his tone and voice and diction tell you about him? How does he write? Yeah.
He writes very casually. He's not trying to, he's trying to just tell it how it is, and doesn't add a lot of extra words. It's
Yeah.
fairly concise.
Yeah, I think as I was reading through, I was kind of shocked at some of the experiences he's talking about that are pretty terrible, and yet he just pretty much talked about it nonchalantly. Let us see here, I wrote some down. So when he's talking about in like even the first and second chapter, his own experiences where he doesn't know who his mother is. Like, right, he lived with her for a little bit, but doesn't really know her because he was taken away. That's a pretty big deal. Like, there's a lot of people today even who are put through the adoption process, and that's a really hard thing. I haven't been adopted, so I would know like that experience, but it can be very hard not to know where you come from. And yet for him, he's totally like, not a big deal. Like, that happened to me, but whatever. Whereas when he's talking about, there's a specific like fraction of the slaves that he tends to think and talk about more harshly and more like it's a big deal. And that's, if you look at the treatment of women slaves, he always, when he writes about them, he's much more impassioned and just angry about what happens to them. So on page 18 of the book, or I guess your guys' pages should be different because you read it on a PDF. But he talks about the treatment of one slave. He says, in all its glaring odiousness that slaveholders have ordained, and by law established, that the children of slave women shall in all cases follow the conditions of their mothers. And this is done too obviously to administer to their own lust, and make the gratification of their wicked desires profitable, as well as pleasurable. For by this cunning arrangement, the slaveholders, in cases not a few, sustain to his slaves the double relation of master and father. So what he's talking about there, so he's talking about how some slaveholders would buy a woman slave because then they could have sex with this slave lady and have her create more slaves basically. So it was profitable in that, like, okay, from one slave you could get a bunch of slaves. And yet, even though their dad was white and was a slaveholder and would have been probably in the upper portion of society, those babies were still considered slaves. They always like followed the mother in that they were all then slaves for whatever fraction of African blood they had in them. And so he thinks that it's disgusting. He calls it wicked desires, cunning arrangement, and odiousness, like glaring odiousness, right? So those are pretty strong words. His diction there is pretty condemning of that process. And he was also, like another time when he talks about women that is sad, he talks about how his grandmother, when she was too old to be productive for the slaveholder, she was sent to live by herself, right? And he says, he knoweth that his master's will. Oh, he says that he leaves her to fend for himself, and then that she's all alone. And he talks about how sad it is to see this. So again, when he talks about female slaves, he tends to be sadder and try to point out the heinousness of what those people are doing. Why do you think it would be, if you're a white person who may have the ability to push for an end of slavery, why would you point out how bad the women are treated versus just an everyday slave? Like, how would that add to your argument? Yeah.
Well, because people who were running to, they had wives, they had daughters, sisters and mothers. But they probably would want that, because we can see how that would not be good.
Yeah, and again, like he's writing to people who can change the institution of slavery, and at this point women can't vote, right? And so he's like, okay, men have like this, especially right now, chivalry is huge in the nation because they're like, you know, you've got like the antebellum South where it's like the guys are always looking to be chivalrous, right, and take care of the women. And so by showing how badly these women are treated, he hopes to kind of play out those emotions. So I guess that kind of goes, we're starting to talk more about the emotions and how he appeals to the beliefs and emotions of his audience. So how else does he appeal to those emotions and beliefs? What else did you notice as you were reading? Okay, so let's think about some of their beliefs. What religion did most of America at this time follow? They're Christian, right? Yeah, so these are Christian people. And at the end, he writes this whole appendix afterwards that Andrew talked about, that basically throughout the book he seems to be almost condemning Christianity, but what he wants to make clear is that he's not condemning all of Christianity, but the perversion of Christianity. He says of these slaveholders who call themselves Christians and yet hold slaves, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. I look upon it as the climax of all misnomers, the boldest of all frauds, and the grossest of all libels. Never was there a clearer case of stealing the livery of the court of heaven to serve the devil in. I am filled with unutterable loathing when I contemplate the religious pomp and show, together with the horrible inconsistencies which everywhere surround me. We have men stealers for ministers, women worshippers for missionaries, and cradle plunderers for church members. The man who wields the blood-clotted cowskin during the week fills the pulpit on Sunday and claims to be a minister of the meek and lowly Jesus. The man who robs me of my earnings at the end of each week meets me as a class leader on Sunday morning to show me the way of life and the path of salvation. He who sells my sister for purposes of prostitution stands forth as the pious advocate of purity. He who proclaims it as a religious duty to read the Bible denies me the right of learning to read the name of God who made me. So he's talking about how, like, the religion of the South is perverted in that they say that they're Christian and that they, believe that the two great commandments, right, are love God and to love man, and yet they hold slaves, which is the complete opposite of what Christ would want these people to do. So he talks about Christianity, and he appeals to the emotions of his audience because he knows that they believe that and they hold that dear. But it's also pretty sophisticated of him because he knows, okay, people feel bad about slaves, but why are they going to go out of their way to end slavery? Well, they may not, but what they care about is themselves and their souls, right? And oh my gosh, as a Christian, I should be fighting to free other people who are oppressed, and I care about my own soul, so maybe I'll go out and do something about it. And so by appealing to this Christian part of them, he's able to then engage them in wanting to end slavery, which is, I think, pretty sophisticated. What does he believe? What evidence is the most effective in making his claims? And how does he make his argument convincing? What kind of evidence does he give? Okay, he tells stories of different slaves, right? Yeah, why would that be an effective piece of evidence to use when trying to convince slaveholders? Yeah.
That was the normal everyday thing. This was happening all around them.
Yeah. Yeah, not only did it happen to me, it happens to these people I know, so it's this common thing that happens, right? He could lay down statistics and whatever, although I don't think that there were a ton during this time that they weren't quite, as a society, as self-reflective about what they were doing wrong, right? But rather, he tells these stories of people because that's effective evidence. He's saying, here's Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. What does he leave out of his narrative? And he even says, I leave this out. Yeah.
How he escaped.
How he escaped. And why would he do that?
He just said she did it so that it wouldn't allow slaveholders to prevent other slaves from escaping slavery.
Yeah, so he's very careful about what he says, because his whole purpose in writing this book is to help his fellow slaves, right? And if he says, this is how I got out in a detailed way, what's the first thing people are gonna do? They're gonna shut that down, right? He even talks about the Upperground Railroad, right, instead of the Underground Railroad, where he talks about why people are like, oh yeah, you know, I'm pretty magnanimous and I help the slaves get out. I'm a part of the Underground Railroad. Well, that's like the dumbest thing you could do, because then you're shutting that down, because people will then look at you, they'll try and stop you from doing what you're doing, and so he doesn't want to end any route that a person could use to get free, and so he leaves that out as part of his evidence, right? He could have put it in there to make his narrative more like believable or like more complete, but he's like, that's not my purpose. My purpose is to help my fellow slaves, and that won't. So he leaves that evidence out. Anything else you want to say about the narrative of Frederick Douglass? Pretty quiet. So for those of you who didn't read it, you're going to need to read it. If you got that email over the summer, you can get the PDF there, or I'll upload it by the end of this morning. I don't have a prep today, so it'll have to probably be at like noon, but I'll upload it. And you'll want to read it before you take your rhetorical triangle exam. Looking at the exam, it's on Canvas. And again, it's closed notes, so you'll want to look at your rhetorical triangle, because it'll ask you about, okay, to label the parts of the rhetorical triangle, and then to explain kind of what each appeal means, and then how they interplay. And then it'll ask you for the two definitions. It will also ask you to apply the rhetorical triangle to Frederick Douglass, so some of the things that we talked about today. You want to find examples that show how the rhetorical triangle, he's using that to convince his audience. So, is that not even put up here? Okay, here it is. I need to put it on the module, so I'll move it over there so you can find it. But you'll fill it out. You should be able to, I just uploaded it as a Google Doc, so then if you click on the link, it will just open into a Google Doc that you can then turn it in when you're done. But yeah, because that's two definitions of rhetoric. You'll label the parts in a little brief explanation. And then examples from Frederick Douglass that demonstrate how parts of the triangle rely or interact on each other. Why is it important to understand? How does knowing about the rhetorical triangle add to your appreciation of the narrative? So how does knowing what he's doing to get his audience to act, how does that make it more complex and something that you can appreciate more? And then the last thing that you're going to do is there is a passage that you're going to annotate. Now, if you want to not print it out and just keep it on the Google Doc, you can just to annotate, you can just click comment and then write like your comments on the side. That's how you can annotate. Or you can, if you're better at like printing it out and writing, you can just print out the PDF and like write your comments on the side if that's easier for you. And then the question that you're going to answer is you're going to write a paragraph arguing which of the inquisitor's appeals is most central to his argument and why. And you're going to integrate examples from the text into your paragraph. And it needs to be this full chunk, right, a full page. You can just delete the lines out if you're typing it, and it's double spaced if you're typing it. If you're writing it, then just write on the lines, write the whole page, and you're going to talk about he used this appeal most effectively, and here's examples of how and why. And then the last question asks you, how much of this exam did you complete on your own without notes or peers? And that answer should be 100%, okay? So that I have given to you. Questions on your exam? So for those of you who haven't read Frederick Douglass yet, you need to do that first before you take the exam, because otherwise you'll have nothing to say for like 3 of those.
When do we need to do that by?
It needs to be done by next Monday. So this week, you'll only have the one in-person class. You don't have to watch tomorrow's class online, because I'm just gonna do the same thing both days. So it doesn't seem very fair to like the next class to be like, oh, you didn't listen to the lecture you didn't know about, right? So, but next week, starting Monday, then Tuesday will be a different class that you'll need to be ready for, okay? So you need to have this done by, I guess, like Sunday at midnight. I mean, I guess you could do it before class, but that seems like a little dangerous for my and then going forward into the class, we're gonna be thinking about literature, not from like an audience's perspective, but how the writer would be thinking as they're writing it, right? We're gonna think like writers. What is this writer doing? What are the decisions he's making to achieve the purpose for his text? And that's kind of the lens we're gonna use, a rhetorical lens for everything that we read. So as you're at home, this week, the other thing you need to do after the exam is to just read through Shooting an Elephant. You don't necessarily need to annotate this first time, because the second time we go through it, we're gonna be annotating it for its purpose and for diction, but we will learn more about that on Monday. So for this read through, you can just read through. If it helps you, sometimes I space if I'm not making notes as I go through, so you can annotate if you want to. It's available online, so you can either just annotate on your computer in the comments, or if, again, if you like to print it out better, you can do that too. Okay? So questions about what you need to get done this week? So I feel like the first day is always awkward and a little boring, but I feel like we'll get more comfortable with each other as the year goes on. Also, many of you were like not here when we first started, so can I just see who showed up that wasn't here before? I'm gonna show you all your secret info. Oh, it's fine. I'm not gonna mark parties like the first day. That seems rough. Okay. Did Allison Black show? Okay, do you go by Allie or Allison? Okay. And then Jesse Clark, nice. Charlie's here.
Sure.
And is Andrew Peck here? Okay, cool. And is it Hannah? Hannah, okay. Cool. Then, yeah, everyone showed up. Okay, cool. We have to like spray down our desks. So I will pass out the paper towels first, and then I'll come around and spray your desk. And when I'm done spraying, you guys can head to your next class, okay? Eventually, we're gonna get more excited about life. I feel like it's math also, or is that math? Is that it?
Oh, we're so excited. Whoa, I just got my head. One. Such a good song.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'll spray it. I feel like it's, I have to do it all those, then otherwise you can just get it over.
A Colby dog. That stuff, bro. There we go. Yo, Keck, how does it compare to P2? BLT birds.
It's good.
Yeah, good to hear. There they come. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Let's get a move on, huh, chunk?